Hello everyone, welcome to Beanstalk.global. My name is Mac Gilivray. We apologise for the slight delay of this initial webcast, but you'll know the reasons why. There's just been a minute's silence for all the key workers who have really unfortunately passed away due to COVID-19. So we obviously would not have started this webinar on the basis of, I don't know, what way to start a webinar. This is the sacrifice that they've made for all of us, as well as all the NHS workers and the care workers in the community. So, done that. Let's move on. We've got some amazing guest experts to speak on this topical, emotional subject, and it's going to be fascinating to see how we take it on and where we take it through to. So, just on Beanstalk, we're now I think on our 12th, 13th iteration of these webinars, and we're covering everything from retail to food service. We've had an absolute demand to talk about this whole subject about food poverty and food banks. So what is Beanstalk? Beanstalk is a social enterprise that we've created that supports, educates and promotes the global fresh food industry to help it thrive and grow faster. We've started with these webinars, which have garnered great interest in the UK and internationally. And under a month, we've already had 15,000 views from a very select food-based community. So we're really proud of that. Where we're going next is that we're going live shortly with web conferences, and we've got a big announcement to make later in the week because there's a fantastic industry food trade group that's aligned to us now, and we're going to be hosting the online conference for them using the Beanstalk platform because they can't have a traditional convention, a traditional exhibition. So we're going to be doing that for them. We'd love to also thank all of our sponsors that you'll see behind me. We would not be able to have got to this point without their trust and their kindness and their investment in what we're looking to do, what we're looking to create. So we need to applaud Westphalia Fruit and Green Cell, some of the best marketeers and growers of avocados globally. Red Fox, who are fantastic a recruitment business, recruitment consultancy operating in the fresh food sectors. Blue Skies, amazing business based out of Brazil, Ghana, Benin, Egypt and South Africa, producing some of the best sliced and diced fresh fruit you can get. And even in Ghana alone, they employ 4,500 people, and they have an ecosystem of 35,000 people that depend on that factory operation in Ghana. We have Kantar, who are really good at crunching the numbers if you need data on where your food or fresh food business is going. G's, one of the largest salad growers, not only in the UK, but also in Europe. Vida Fresh, one of the fastest growing fresh produce companies in the UK, who source tropical fruit and then present it into the retail and the food service sector in the UK. And lastly, but not least, AC Gotham's, who are one of the best apple growers in the whole of the UK. We'd love to thank all of you, our viewers in the UK and internationally. And remember, questions. We want questions from you for our panel. So let's just coming over to our panel. What I'm going to do is just going to get them to run through who they are, where they are, and then we're going to come back to me, and I'm going to kick off with this with this note as to the State of the Union as to this important subject. So no particular order. Let us start with Dawn. Dawn, who are you and where are you?
My name is Dawn Stanford. I am the operations manager for Nourish Community Food Bank, and we are based in Tunbridge Wells in Kent.
And Dawn, what should have been happening in a couple of months' time that we were talking about earlier?
Oh yeah, I'm due to get married. I was on June the 20th, but it's been postponed.
And we have, whilst we do the warm-up, we did organise for Dawn to get married with her fiance on this webinar, but she can't find her fiance for some reason.
No.
Leon, Leon, where are you? Who are you?
Yes, Leon Aerts. I'm the founder of Compassion London. I'm in the office next to our kitchen. And we started on the 25th of March, cooking 200 meals for NHS workers, key workers, homeless and the elderly and the vulnerable. And at the moment, we cook and deliver over 3,000 meals every day all around London. And we're growing as well. So,
wow. Well done. Thank you. Lucy?
Hello, everybody. I'm Lucy Antal. I'm based up here in Merseyside. I'm working from home, as I have done for years. So I know it's all new to everyone else, but hey. I work for Feedback Global, which is a charity which specialises in recommending new ways to change food systems. And I run a project called the Regional Food Economies of the Northwest, part of which involves a social enterprise called Alchemic Kitchen, and we've changed our business model in the last sort of 4 weeks or so, and we are providing 350 fresh soups and breads every week with a team of basically 2. So I'm very proud of them.
Wow, well done. Big applaud there. Maureen, who are you? Where are you?
Good morning. My name's Morven McCahern. I'm a professor of sustainability and ethics at the Huddersfield Business School. And you can see our lovely campus behind me, taken on another day. I actually live in Manchester, and basically myself and my colleagues from Salford and from Birmingham University just recently completed a British Academy funded project looking at food poverty, transitions in and out of food poverty, and hopefully I'll get to tell you a bit more about that project later on in the webinar.
Fantastic. And we both established earlier when we were doing the warm-up that although we've both got a Scottish heritage, neither of us speak Doric, do we? But we'd love to. and last but not least, Miranda.
Hi, I'm Miranda Pallan. I'm a consultant in public health and a researcher from the University of Birmingham. And my research interest is around healthy eating and physical activity in children. And currently we have a study ongoing in schools across the West Midlands to look at school food policy and how that's implemented in schools and what effect it has on school children's diets. But obviously, just at the moment, we're pausing that. So we're hoping to resume that once the schools open at least. And I'm currently working at home from my home in Birmingham.
Well done. So guys, the title that we started off with is 3 million people are going hungry in the UK alone because of lockdown. Food poverty is escalating and food banks are getting overwhelmed. What is the answer? And we've talked about it over the last month. And I'm just going to be direct and emotive on this one. I and a number of people that I listen to are really worried about the potential car crash coming on, because there is a view in the bubble that I live in sunny Suffolk, that the food poverty and food banks, this is only people in slum estates that suffer from this issue. But you look at where we are statistically, that when we went into the lockdown scenario, there's the stat that most or a majority of households don't have more than £1,000 cash reserves. When we had the panic buying, a lot of people went out and panic bought product that they thought they would need, and they've either used up that reserve and filled up their credit cards. They've then come home and, at worst case, they've been made redundant or they've been furloughed. If they have a house, the stats have already come out that 1 or 2 out of 9 households have gone for a mortgage holiday, so that they get a holiday of 3 months on the mortgage payments. And the concern that we've got is that when the mortgage holiday is over, and people want to go out and buy food, and if they've been furloughed or been made redundant, they might not be able to buy food. And we've got this crazy situation, not only in the UK, but also in the States, that there's going to be rapid food inflation. There's huge food waste, and the food service sector, because that sector's been decimated, the food that would normally be going into food service can't be redirected to go into retail. So food service companies are dumping that food, but then the retail sector is going to be struggling, or is struggling now, to get food. We're also picking up that there's a significant number of people who are looking for payment holidays on car finance and credit cards, and so you can see what's going to happen, that there's going to be this crunch where people aren't going to have the money, but they need food. We've said it before in previous webinars that there has to be, that we are but 4 missed meals from anarchy. And then we've got you guys doing these amazing things. The government is focusing on looking to get businesses hibernated, or giving them cash in some form of format to keep them going. But we've got Joe Public, and we've got this big car crash happening with Joe Public, let alone the UN stating that by the end of the year there's going to be 130 million people who are going to be facing starvation. So we're all UK centric, but this problem is not only in the UK, it is on a global basis. So let's start this off. Leon, tell us what you're seeing at the moment within Compassion London, and what your views are of this current situation, please.
Yeah, that's a big question, also with your introduction. I think we see a lot of, in the discussion we have now, food poverty in like many ways. People who are on high income, who all of a sudden lose their job, who have, high outgoings as well. We supply to a few schools where the heads of the school and the teachers help us to give food to not just children who have the free school meals, but the ones just above that who don't have the support for the free school meals, but are, were living before that kind of hand to mouth every month, and now can't afford to buy for their food. The Guardian published an article last week, Monday, that 1.5 million people in the UK at the moment don't have a meal every day. And it wouldn't surprise me if that number was a lot higher. We get messages on a daily basis. I had one last week. Leon, I'm a single mom, a cancer survivor with a 3-year-old. We've been eating ice cream for 3 days.
Oh.
She can't, she can't go out of the house, in a place like London, doesn't have the support network. And of course, we supply her with 4 meals every 2 days. And in my opinion, that's the biggest challenge for the people to get to. We are working on that. That's why we're going to move to a bigger kitchen in a week's time. Because, we have to look after our key workers, and many hospitals at the moment are turning away food because they get too much. There's still hospitals who are asking for food. We do 15 hospitals every day. But the ill, the elderly, and the vulnerable, how I call them, they are really the biggest challenge, because we don't know where to find them. Our system has crumbles. A lot of elderly people who used to go to church groups, to community groups, 2 or 3 times a week for some social activity and get something to eat, those are closed. Often they don't have the, all the email addresses, or these people are not on email, and we don't know where to find them. And, there is the councils, many people are not working, they're furloughed or whatever. It's very difficult to reach out to them. And the way we're going to do that is via a campaign via the newspapers, where we say, if you need a meal, press here. So, of course, I say they're a bit simple, but I believe there's a lot more poverty than we really realize. And it won't finish at the end of this lockdown, because I come out of the restaurant industry and the food industry. Many businesses won't open, unfortunately, after this. So a lot of people won't be able to go back to their jobs.
Leon, thank you. Dawn, what are you seeing, please?
Yeah, our Nourish itself has been around for about 7, nearly 8 years. And actually, our client base has always been less than 10% of the unemployed. So that's over 90% each time of those that are working families who are living hand to mouth, that cannot predict or compensate for those unexpected costs that come up. And the money will always come straight from the only flexible budget in the household, which is shopping. You cannot take anything out of anything else, because your rent and your bills kind of, even if you've cut them, remain the same. And so that's always been our experience. And before this current crisis, we were still delivering between 80 and 100 parcels a week. That's doubled during, it hit by the end of March. We started creeping up over the hundreds, 150. Last week we were 247. This week I'm seeing probably nearer to 280. And that's within 5 days to different households within the borough. And I agree, every household, I feel, is less than 3 paychecks away from being in crisis. Even if you've got a bit of a reserve, which people don't. Furloughed wages cover 80% of your bills. If you suddenly had to slash, it's like taking a pay cut. It is brilliant, and it is an amazing thing to have 80% of your wages to keep you at home. But your bills won't be slashed by 20% overnight. In fact, they've probably gone up if you've suddenly got your children at home, or you're using more electricity, you're working from home. Those things, it's like a sliding scale, and you get given it in one hand and it automatically slides out the other.
And Dawn, we're picking up, whether it be, I'm trying to get myself plugged into so many media outlets, so whether it be on the Radio 4 Today programme, like of the Financial Times, they're picking up that a number of businesses are just taking a view that their revenue income is not going to pick up, so they're now looking to proceed straight to redundancy after a couple of months, and so that's just going to obviously exacerbate the situation even more so. Lucy, views please, what you're seeing.
We are based in the second most deprived borough in the UK, in Knowsley, and I'm aware from work that I also do with the Alexandra Rose charity, where we support children and families who are living in poverty, just how bad the situation was before this happened. I think the statistics are something like 4.8 million people were at risk of food insecurity before COVID-19 hit. And I think we could comfortably double that as to where we are now. Speaking in terms of what's actually happening on the ground around us, we've seen a lot of food banks have closed, and that's because they are generally, if they're not what you might call the statutory food banks, because there is a difference. You have ones where people can be referred with a voucher scheme, and there's a limit to how many times you can visit, or you've got the community groups, and the community groups are the ones that have been hardest hit, because the majority of those were run by older volunteers who of course are the at-risk category and are ending up shielding. So that has meant there's more strain on the larger food banks, if you like. But the issue around food supply, particularly when people were relying on extras from supermarkets, etc., that has dropped quite significantly. Yet at the same time, we are also seeing a tremendous amount of food that could be going into supermarkets and into retail spaces from farms due to things like contracts being cancelled, due to export reductions, etc. My organisation, Feedback, runs something called the Gleaning Network. And last Tuesday, we went out to a farm in Tarleton and rescued 1.5 tonnes of beetroot and 800 heads of cauliflower. And that then got redistributed to groups such as the others around the table who are feeding people in Merseyside. So the food is out there, but the logistics is part of the problem.
Okay, and if you look at what's happening overnight in the likes of the States, they're about to run into a meat crisis because a number of the packing plants, there are hot spots of the workers getting infected with COVID-19. So they're closing those meat packing stations down, and they're having to dump potentially thousands of tons of meat in landfill because they can't process it, whilst the Americans are going hungry. And that Lisa, it's amazing that. I can't believe that example about the likes of beetroot, and there'll be some people who'll be watching this will be horrified by that, because they are. So there's just this huge disconnect with the likes of the food service side, as I said at the intro, not being able to get into the retail side or into you guys. Miranda, sorry, Lucy, let's get around everyone. Miranda, what are you seeing? What are your thoughts, please?
I think, resonant with what Dawn, Lucy and Leon have said already, actually, I think that the key bit here is that you need to consider where we were before all this happened. So before COVID-19, we've got a huge difference in life expectancy between rich and poor. We know that, and that was actually getting bigger and not smaller anyway. Nutrition and food obviously plays a really substantial part in that, along with things like housing and education. And it is that issue about those who are dependent on wages. So those that have low incomes and are dependent on their weekly or monthly wage are the ones that are going to get hit most by this. They were already struggling. There's already not enough support for these, and that's why we've seen food bank use go up year on year, as I'm sure Dawn will know intimately. And now, as you've illustrated, Dawn, it's gone up exponentially, and that's just one manifestation of the issue around the lockdown differentially affecting those on low incomes. Another is around, obviously, children, schools closing, children who did have access to free school meals now don't, although there are schemes to try and address that. And I thought it was very interesting what you said, Leon, about providing food to those that don't qualify for those free school meals but actually are going to be affected because they live in relatively low income households.
I've got so many questions on the back of this, but Morvin, we've got to come to you. What's your view? What's your take, please?
Well, our sort of research looked at two you know, following on from Lucy's point about sort of Merseyside area. We looked at Salford, Greater Manchester, and Birmingham as part of our sort of 2 case studies. And I think, you know, as many of the others have stated as well, you know, in terms of the numbers, this was such a serious issue prior to COVID-19. I mean, in your sort of key question, Max, you know, you mentioned this figure about 3 million. There's over 14 million people classified according to the Social Metrics Commission living in poverty. That constitutes roughly between 20 to 25% of the overall British population. And that's been the same figure around poverty since the year 2000. So we've not shifted hugely over the last 2 decades. Now, you've mentioned the sort of Trussell Trust food banks, Lucy. You know, them alone have witnessed increases in demand over 70% over the last couple of years. And then on top of that, we've got around 800 independent food bank organisations and charities trying to meet the demand. Now, what we've seen certainly in Greater Manchester is the difficulties around mobilising those donations. They're struggling to get the food to the people that need it most. So I think we're sort of seeing 2 things here. So we're looking at a system that was under tremendous pressure prior to COVID-19, and the additional pressure as a result of the loss of jobs, illness, you know, the applications for universal credit or financial assistance in some way. I mean, in the last 2 weeks, I think some of the statistics that were reported was just over, was it 950,000 people applying for universal credit in the first 2 weeks of April. You know, normally there's 100,000 people in any given 2 weeks applying for those. It's got a built-in 5-week delay already. Now, the crisis that then spins off in terms of food poverty, not just food poverty, I would argue as well, but poverty in general around all the other aspects that we need to secure a reasonable, you know, existence.
Okay, so the government has ploughed into business something in the region of 350 billion. It's costing, is it 1.5 billion a day on furlough wages? What, help me, educate me, what's happening in the respect of these people who can't get food? Is the government doing anything to assist, or is it not their problem? What's your thoughts? We'll jump around, but Leon, what do you think?
Well, we haven't seen much support from government. We are supported by food waste charities like the Felix Project here in London, City Harvest, by individuals and companies. We work together a little bit with Barnet and sorry, I'm not from this part of London where the kitchen is. Barnet and another one who give us some food sometimes when it comes to the council, but that's it. We've been in contact with some councillors, so we haven't seen much support from the government or from local councils, to be honest to you, yet. Okay,
Miranda, what's your take? Should instead of the government potentially bailing out airlines that were broken anyway and perhaps not doing much for the environment, should that not be redirected into the public? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the way you do that. I mean, I think what we're seeing is there's a huge amount of voluntary networks going on. There's a huge amount of innovation going on within communities, which is great to see. But I think what needs to happen is there needs to be some organisation around that. And also we need to think about the long term around this as well, because this isn't going to go away.
Oh, no.
Obviously, but you know, we're going to reset in some way that's likely to include rising prices, cost of food, cost of living in general. I think it's very, very important to frame this in the sense of it's not just about food, it's about living costs, and food is part of that. So yeah, I would like to see much more organisation and support and tapping into all these kind of innovations and charity sector things going on from the government through local governments. But of course, local governments are struggling and they're squeezed in all sorts of ways at the moment too.
Lucy, Dawn, go on, free for all. What do you think? What do you think needs to be done in the short term to make sure that, I'm sorry for the emotive expression, to make sure there aren't bodies on the street?
So Nourish has always had the model which is of the flip side to Trussell. So we are an independent one. We do self-fund. We obviously run through grant applications and internal fundraising, but we've always home delivered our food parcels. We've never had clients having to come to us. So to tweak our system wasn't so bad. I mean, we did have to lay off about 80% of our volunteers because they were in the shielded bracket. But we tapped into very quickly local networks at the local rugby club, teachers that wouldn't be working and people who already had enhanced DBSs that we could recruit very quickly and turn around and obviously use for deliveries. So that's been fairly logistical, easy for me. And I feel a bit complacent and sitting back. I'm not gloating at all. It's just that our model was already that way. And our COVID response emergency centre that's organised by local government also was up and running very quickly for this area, for Tunbridge Wells itself, which is only one town. And so basically they field the majority of the help me calls that don't come directly to the local food bank, and they have home delivered to all the shielded clients. So they've got this basic government box, which is emergency supplies of food. And then what they've done is they've identified those that would be a short-term crisis, as in I can't get shopping delivered, rather than I don't have funds. And if they don't have funds, then obviously they're filtered through to me, and then Nourish takes them on board. And supply of food has been an immediate worry for us. Donations obviously slid down immediately in response to the demand sliding up immediately. So we had to swap to asking for funds instead of food, and we were very lucky in that we managed to get in there quite early, and we've managed to buy from wholesalers. But that's also been logistically quite impossible. We've had to go to 8 wholesalers where we would normally be able to use 1 or 2. We've had to sort of have lots of people doing it at the same time, rather than it would be usually done by me, and a couple of phone calls and I'd be okay. So yeah, we've had to kind of change our way of thinking.
Well done. Lucy.
Right, well, I might be throwing the hand grenade into the room, but I'm going to say you can't look at any of this without looking at the austerity policies of the last 10 years and the dismantling that's happened around the social sector and voluntary sector in terms of the support that's offered, the way in which the safety nets have all been removed from social activity, the fact that we've lost places where people could congregate, where people could actually spend time, where people were supported. That's all disappeared. Lots and lots of councils have been pushed into deficit. And just to go back to your point that you made earlier, Max, there has been money made available by the government. They've given out quite a lot of money in their eyes to different councils. But the problem is the holes in the council's budgets are so huge in terms of social support that it's but a drop in the ocean, and it's actually not making that much of a difference in terms of actually getting out to people that need it. I really don't think that it's fair or right that the social and voluntary sector are having to pick all this up and having to scrabble around looking for donations. I personally think that things like social housing, utilities, transport and food should not be seen as pure profit makers. They should be social enterprises that can turn a small profit, but is ploughed back into what they're doing, because to me, that is the essence of being a citizen of this country, that some of those aspects, some of those items are there to support you, not to make money for the people that own the utility companies and everything else that goes with it. And I think that's where we've got this huge problem. And I think if we're moving forward into a bright new world, we have to address some of those issues, because housing costs, utility costs and transport costs, particularly in the north, where we don't have the London luxury of a sort of set fee. I mean, it can cost somebody £6 to do one bus journey in Liverpool. That's madness.
So hold on, Maureen. Lucy, so I've got the hotline to Boris Johnson here. And we're not going to look back because what's happened has happened. We want to create success, and we want to create success from this webinar. What are you, Lucy, going to tell Mr. Johnson and his cabinet that you think needs to happen over the next 3-5 years as we work through COVID-19?
He needs to invest in supporting the social infrastructure of communities and cities to be able to weather these storms again. That means removing changing how some of that money is distributed. So I'll give you an example. In Liverpool, we are reliant on council tax as one of the income generators that our council can then spend out. Due to legacy of unemployment, ill health, etc., we've got more people not able to pay that council tax. So we've actually got less money to pay with in the first place, which means we've got less money to spend on the social side of things. But we need that more than other cities. So it's looking at those imbalances. And the other thing that I'm going to bang on about is the issue of access to food. We have got too many spaces in our country, in our cities, in our urban exits, in our rural spaces where you cannot get food easily because it's all ended up morphed as part of the big supermarket kind of chain and the just-in-time models. They're not agile enough to have coped with this, which is why we've seen all these problems that have been happening in the supermarkets. We need to go back to the basics of having shops that are available and open near where you live so that you can shop easily.
Yeah. Maureen?
Yeah, I'm just, following on from Lucy's comments there. I think, clearly we need to look at the welfare support system. That's clear from everything we've discussed so far. But I think on top of that, for given my experience and interests around this area, is we need a sustainable food policy. For years, we've been academics in the sort of food sector, we've been looking at the ethics around the fact that 8 key retailers control 90% of the food supply that takes place in this country, and at the expense of growers, of manufacturers. We need a fairer, a more just, and clearly a much more sustainable food supply system to make this work. And that's certainly something I would say that the government needs to look at when we do come out the other end of COVID-19.
Well done. So Leon, you're sat in London in one of the top 5 richest cities in the world. You're surely not seeing the same problems as Lucy in Liverpool and Dawn in Tunbridge Wells. What's the point of view, Leon? Leon, you're on mute, big man.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I agree. We have to go to a more sustainable and just food system. I think that starts by, if I would have Boris Johnson on the phone, I would, we have to start by looking after our farmers better. That we all start to look after more local food, buying more local food, and not spend a lot of money on getting food from other countries. The only reason why we support our airlines so much is because the belief is that they support our economy so well by bringing in tourists and businessmen, because that's the only reason, and we have to look at that in a different way. And the reason I started Compassion London is I done something like this similar in the refugee crisis, and I thought I can do it again with the help of many volunteers. And we always say this is by people for people. And what I hope that we have after this crisis, that we start treating each other a little bit in a different way and not judge ourselves by our bank account or what's on our business card or the amount of houses we have, and that we start looking at each other in a different way, because everything in our society is built on monetary value. And, we don't know any other way now anymore. And hopefully this crisis shows us that we have to go back to basics and start to treat each other, as human beings again. And then all the other things like a more sustainable food system, and more equal systems for everything. Also, it's ridiculous that we pay so much money to go on a bus in Liverpool while it's a different price in London. That should be everywhere the same. I hope that we go back to that. So my hope is that we see each other as human beings again, because I think that's what we've forgotten. And when we start doing that more, we also will have all the solutions for all the problems we're talking about.
And going back to my point, there seems to be so much focus of the government looking to support business,
Yeah.
but not you guys, not those suffering from food poverty. Miranda, so if you've got this hotline to Boris, what would you be saying to him to create this success, this solution over the next 3 to 4 to 5 years?
I think that the government needs to have a really strong health inequalities policy, because that will link, and that should link to the sustainable food policy that Morgan's talking about as well. It's really, really important that we think about those that are most vulnerable and are hard. So they were most vulnerable anyway. I think this is the biggest thing, is they were most vulnerable in terms of nutrition, housing, education, all the rest of it before this. And it's amplified, this crisis has amplified that for them. So it's going to make that difference across our society absolutely hugely worse. The government haven't had an inequalities policy for the last 10 years. And now, well, coming to it late, but now is the time to really think about that. And that needs to cut through everything. That needs to cut through food, through housing, through all of those things. I think that very much hopefully speaks to what Lucy was saying as well.
Okay, Miranda, thank you. So guys, I've got the answer to this. All these people that are suffering from food poverty, they just need to get a job. There's 90,000 people required to pick the UK harvest, and there's been a big campaign called #Feed the Nation. So far they've only had about 10,000 people come in, and there's been mixed reports about how they're getting on. Surely these people should just go out into the fields and pick the harvest for 2020. Lucy, views please.
Rubbish, frankly.
Yeah.
I think you have to remember, despite what certain people might think, farm work and farm labouring is not an unskilled job. It requires somebody who knows what they're doing. It requires somebody who's got agility. It requires someone who can manage long hours. It's not particularly conducive to people who have families, who can only work certain hours, who can only work in certain places. And lest we forget the transport issue, it's not that easy to get to a lot of these farms and farm places. So unless we think about that, I really don't see that is the solution. I believe, I could be wrong here, but there was something like 1,500 people applied for some of those jobs, and only actually 110 have taken up the offers of jobs. And that's partly to do with exactly what I've just discussed, which is the need for the training, the fact that it's short-term contracts, the fact that it's very long, hard work every day, the fact that they can't move around because, you know, when the food's ready to pick, you can't postpone it. So I don't see that, unfortunately, as the answer. If we were to go a bit more small scale, so that we've got things around our cities, market garden style like we used to, that might be a solution.
Well done. Lucy, so you're in Tunbridge Wells, you're on the fruit basket of the UK. Surely you're telling all the people that you're giving food parcels to, go get a job. There's enough strawberry farms here, apple orchards here to go out and get working. What's your views, please, Dawn?
No, that's not what I'm telling them at all. We do live in the middle of this Garden of Kent, and there are a lot of farms around, but I completely agree with Lucy. The logistics of getting it from A to B, we just can't do that on our own. And I would have my little hotline to Boris to say, you need to help us get this food that's being wasted, because, you know, they're constrained by all these different bits. Get these to the people that are living daily in food poverty, you know, before this crisis, during this crisis, and on to the next crisis, because this is not, you know, this is not it. This is just making it on everybody's minds now. But this has been happening before, and it will carry on unless we change something and come out of this with an actual plan forward. Yeah.
So and am I going to say this? Yes, I'm going to say this. There's because I know a number of very large number of fresh produce growers. One thing that does seem to be coming over with this demand for pickers, for harvest workers, is the lack of flexibility from those growers, to the extent that they're expecting people to be just like the Eastern Europeans that come over, working 6 days a week, no part-time, no flexibility, have to live on site. And if you're a mum with a couple of kids, single parent, and you can do Tuesday mornings and Thursday afternoons, and that brings in 60 quid, fantastic, but there doesn't seem to be that flexibility coming over from the growers. And you go back in the day, Dawn, you think of that whole Kent area. It was families that used to come down to the hop picking regions and make a summer holiday of it. I know the businesses are more commercial, and there's some great examples of some businesses in Kent that are doing that, but there are some other businesses in the fresh food sector who just seem to be working like a factory operation and assume that these UK individuals will just adopt the practices that have gone before. But this is a complete new age. So guys, here comes my naivety again. I'm just thinking back to the food crisis and the likes of Ethiopia, and what we did then was we just all rallied round and we threw them seed and rice and said, there you go, get on with it. So they had something to eat, but they didn't have anything for the long term. Are we just talking here, apart from our occasional call to Boris, are we just talking here in the short term? That the long term, isn't there an answer both with government involvement, helping people to be fed in the short term, but business to work with all of us to create jobs so that these people can try and get out of the poverty rut that they're in? So there's that union of businesses and people working together. Maureen.
Sorry, I think my broadband sort of cut out for a bit of that, but I think going back to catching what I did, employment has never been higher prior to the COVID-19, if you look at government statistics. And the problem with that is due to the rise in flexible 0 hours contracts, for example. So the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, for example, they calculated that 1 in 8 people were classified as the working poor.
Yeah.
So they had access to employment, but that salary wasn't enough or the hours weren't enough. So it's not just a case, it's not as simplistic as being able to say, we'll give you a job and then all your problems will be sorted. I think during Spain and Italy, who are a bit further ahead of this COVID-19 curve than we are, Spain's just come out in the last few days and announced they're going to trial a basic universal income. And this might be a good time once we come out of COVID-19 to suggest, why don't we try something like that? We know universal credit doesn't work. We know our welfare support system is in dire straits, that the people needing this help are not getting access with food poverty at the moment. They're not necessarily unemployed, waiting at home until somebody calls them up and says, can you come and pick fruit for us for a couple of weeks? It's not going to fix things.
No. Okay. Miranda, my view of being able to work with business and these people below the poverty line, is that an answer for the medium long term?
I think it's tricky. I mean, I would echo what Morven says. I mean, the key bit here is at the moment, we've got people working, and that's not, but their income is below living wage, and that's the key bit. And that's not, that's not just a few. That's a huge amount of the population that just cannot meet their living costs. So if you're going to, I don't work with businesses particularly, but I think if you're going to look at working with business and providing jobs, that's an absolute key principle that would need to be adhered to for that to work.
Leon, you're a businessman, you're an entrepreneur, you've worked in refugee camps, you're doing Compassion for London now. What's your take? Do you think the answer in the medium long term is for business to work with people under the food poverty line, or are you going to be running Compassion London for the foreseeable future?
Yes, the plan for us is to keep running and to make this into a sustainable organization, not just here for COVID. On some other work I've done in the past, I truly believe that any business, not just foods businesses, when they connect to a purpose and giving back to the community and connecting with that will enhance their bottom line in every way. Their people will be happier. They communicate clearer with their customers or their guests, as we call it in the restaurant trade, what they stand for. And that will result in, also better financial results. So I truly believe that works, and that is proven by many businesses all over the world now, that's still a model which I hope gets picked up better in general, especially here in the West. You know, there is, for example, the name escapes me, and it's not a food business, but there's a very well-known dentistry business in India who does millions and millions of people every year, and they work totally in the gift economy. So you pay there what you can or what you want, and they're very, very profitable. And I'm not saying that that's a model which always works in our industry, but I truly believe that when we connect doing good with doing business, then it really helps all of us. And I hope that more businesses after this will go that way. And I already had some discussions with people who are come and volunteer for us. I mean, we got anything here from people who are cleaners in daily life till barristers and lawyers, and helping us, you know, in their free time, come and cook and deliver food. And we had discussions about that, and you know, that's really amazing. So I hope more of that comes out of this.
Well done, Leon. Thank you, Lucy. Just coming back to yourself with the. You're so insightful with the way that you've described the situation we're in, because of the last 10 years of underinvestment, especially what's going on in Liverpool. I've never been, don't tell anyone, but I've never particularly done anything original in my life. I tend to plagiarise the things I like and try and adapt them for my own use. Is there a city or a country that you've seen that actually has got a system that works, that has been in a similar situation, say to the likes of Liverpool, and they've managed to work their way through? Is there a city or a country that you think we could follow?
I'm not 100% sure I could give you a single answer on that. I've been lucky enough to travel to quite a few different spaces as part of my job, because prior to this I was also Sustainable Food Cities Coordinator for Liverpool. So I got to go to Spain, and I also got to go recently to Gothenburg in Sweden, which has a really interesting model whereby the council actually bought up all of the land around the outskirts of the city with a view to them becoming as big as London at one point. But as that didn't happen, they've then repurposed that land and they let it out for growing at very, very low rates. So it's created a market garden kind of necklace around Gothenburg, which then all feeds into the local schools. It feeds into all the local universities. It's very entrepreneurial focused. And it means that a lot of that money also stays what I would describe as circular economy. That's one of the main tenets behind the project that I run, Regional Food Economy, is the idea that we need to make things more circular in the way that we work, that we need to dismantle the food system so that it's a little less just in time and focused on 3 and 4 years ahead of forecasting and contracts, which at the end of it, we can't quite manage. And we need to look smaller. We need to work with procurement officers. We should be looking more, as I said, about social value. So it should be about making sure people have living wage who are working all up and down the food chain, and also improving the distribution. Now, Liverpool has got many challenges, but one of the things that it's always had is what I would describe as a real entrepreneurial spirit. So in many ways, we don't ask permission, we ask for forgiveness, and we just get on with it. And I'm seeing that particularly at this time as well. So I'm working, as I mentioned, in Knowsley, which is a borough that has had its fair share of deprivation. We've got sort of 1,500 children living below the poverty line, etc. And there's a group of small group of communities that are all coming together, working in a network, and they're working how we can then come out of this with something new. So we're looking at how can we create a sustainable food system in that borough post this crisis. So at the moment we're doing the sticking plaster thing of sorting out fresh veg boxes and things like that, but in the future, can we then have mobile fruit and veg vans going around these estates where at the moment there is no food available? Can we create a space? Can we create this availability? Because again, I know from my work with Alexandra Rose, if you provide the fresh fruit and vegetables, the families will buy it, they'll use it, they'll improve their health. But the issue has always been, if it's not there, people can't buy it. People can't travel, people don't have the wherewithal or the impetus to go and get it. So I think all of that is really crucial, and I'm going to stop ranting now.
Well, no, Lucy, you did absolutely fine. It's a bit like an example I always give of Tolworth in London, and Leon, you'll probably know this better than I, that the average a 12-year-old from their door to school in Tolworth passes 6 pizza shops, all selling a slice of pizza at £1 a pop. Any fruit and veg shops? Probably not. Miranda, circular economy, is that the answer when we get out of this?
I mean, I think the answer is going to be, there's going to have to be multiple strands to this. That's certainly something that sounds like, that has mileage. I think it is, again, that thing about the two things that we have to think about are access, which again goes back to the needing fresh produce, fresh fruit and veg in the places where people can access it easily, and then affordability as well. And I think those are the two, again, the two kind of underlying principles we might need to think about in terms of our food business models and food supply chains, etc.
Thank you. Maureen, circular economy?
Circular economy, certainly, I think you asked for an example of a city or a country. One of the cities that I'm familiar with is the city of Preston in the north of England, who, as we've discussed already, in terms of councils losing years, they've re-looked at the small company called Clays, forget what the acronym stands for now, but they basically helped Preston City Council in, looking at their vision for the city and how to make it more sustainable. And it all boils down to basically spending more money locally, using local businesses, ensuring that when you go shopping, when you do your DIY, whatever you're buying, if you spend it locally, the benefits will occur locally as well. And I think, that sustainable supply chain for our food sector, if we adopt these kind of practices, then hopefully we can feed our communities. We can create innovative entrepreneurial ways of distributing that food to everyone that needs it.
Well done, guys. We're just coming up to the wrap-up stage. I've got my phone here to Boris Johnson, but I've also got connections to a significant number of fresh food companies in the UK and internationally, and there'll be 1,000 odd people from the food sectors watching this as well. Dawn, Lucy, Leon, if we could wave a magic wand to help you in the short term with the assistance of these food companies, what would you request from them? And Lucy, what was your expression earlier? You don't ask for permission. You ask for, what was the expression earlier?
You ask for forgiveness, so you get on and do it and then apologise afterwards.
Right, so Dawn, Lucy, Leon, none of you are shy. What do you want from the food sectors now in the short term? Dawn, you go first.
We would really like fresh produce. It's the issue we have as a food bank is our storage is for dried and non-perishables. So we need access to refrigerated storage or cold storage where we can get the fresh produce. Nourish is a gateway also to lots of other organisations like the Women's Refuge, like the Homeless Move On hostels, like the Young Persons Units, the hostels that have young mothers with babies and pregnant mothers. They all need this fresh produce that farmers cannot give to anyone else. We would love assistance in getting that to them. It's so important to their diet, to their nutrition, to their well-being. That's what we want.
Dawn, how much do you want on a weekly basis for the next couple of months?
Well, if I'm doing 250 to 280 households, and they aren't all single households, they could be families of 11, they could be families of 12, families of 9. I want a lot. It's not much to ask, is it? And I'd like it all home delivered to me. I've got the volunteers. This is the thing. I've got the resources. I've got, I just need the storage and some help with the logistics. I've got the volunteers. I've got the need. I've got the avenues into all these places. I just need access to this fresh food.
Right.
The gleaning networks we have around here are brilliant. It's just they are sometimes at certain times when I can't forward that food through quick enough. I need somewhere to have on the interim so we can get it, we can store it, and then we can get it out. I can turn it around very, very quickly. I just need access.
Okay, on a Britain's Got Talent basis, Dawn gets 4 yeses.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Brilliant.
Leon, what do you want from the fresh produce companies that are watching this and that we can get in contact with on your behalf? What do you want?
So what we want is fresh produce as well, that goes from vegetables, all kind of greens, pallets of pasta, rice, meats, vegetarian products. You believe it or not, but out of the 3,000 meals, almost half is requested vegetarian at the moment, which, as a vegetarian myself, pleases me. We cook meat, but we have the infrastructure. We are at a big stadium kitchen now where we're scaling up. Next week, I go to a kitchen where we can do 20,000 meals a day. We have the professional chefs for that. We have the volunteers for that. We have the infrastructure to deliver it. We're scaling up very fast. So what we need is the fresh food. So that's a perfect question. And yeah, we can think in pallets. We got the storage. So the more supply we get, the more we can give out there, because as we established, the demand is huge.
4 yeses for Leon. Well done, thank you.
Thank you.
Lucy, what would you like to see from our connections?
Well, okay, I'm going to be slightly difficult, as per normal, and just remind everybody that the farmers do also need paying. So it can't always just be about free stuff. And I think if we're going to build a sustainable food system post-COVID, we need to also build in costs and people being paid properly in terms of their produce and where they're getting it from. I think there's been quite a lot of middlemen who've taken large slices, which has stopped farmers getting quite as much money as they ought. And I know from the work that we do at Feedback just how much food actually ends up wasted because it doesn't fit the parameters that are required by buyers and also by the wholesale market. I don't understand why we can't have a secondary market that deals in what you might call wonky veg or second or even third class veg. And that's a way in which we could supply and work with food banks or also other communities that perhaps have got less money to spend, but nevertheless could spend it wisely on supporting those particular food producers and industries to create fresh food and start getting people out of this cycle of always expecting everything for free, but also being able to make some of those choices and those purchases themselves. I would love to see any of these fresh produce people perhaps helping us to get our delivery service up and running in Knowsley. So, you know, I'd like to see a little fleet of electric milk vans, but in fact doing fruit and veg, and let's have them going around all the districts and start getting people re-engaged and re-involved with their food.
Yeah. 4 stars, Lucy, well done. So that's four stars for Dawn, Lucy and Leon. Let's see what we can do on their behalf. And that's the exciting thing about Beanstalk. We've literally only been going a month, but everything that you've been talking about, we want to do in the respect of the connections that we've got and being able to link them into all of you. So anything that we can do to assist you guys in the short term, we will do. But in the medium long term, we want to get, and there's lots of questions, comments flying in on the Q&A about trying to get those food companies linked into food banks. And yes, Lucy, absolutely being paid for. There is a certain amount of wonky veg that does go out or go to landfill, and that needs to be redirected because there's obviously nothing wrong with it whatsoever. So guys, I always find with these webinars, if we have a fairly emotive and perhaps a depressing subject, there's always a positive from it. So that's how we're going to end up. And I'm just going to run around all of you for you to summarise as to what you think is going to be the positive from this. In times of distress like this, there's innovation that we're picking up. There's passion galore, as we can see here. It's the positivity that we're looking for when we get out of this. So Maureen, let's start with you. What do you think is going to be the positive from this, and how do we create that?
Well, I think certainly what I'm seeing is that community spirit. You know, just something simple as going to your front gate or hanging out your window and clapping for a minute to show your appreciation for all of the key workers. We can see it. All the neighbours are talking to one another. They're waving across the road to one another. They're having conversations where, you know, they've never spoken to one another previously because we've been so busy going about our daily lives and having no connections. Communities, workers coming together, sewing PPE equipment, for instance, So if anything's going to come out of this, you know, we've got these connections working together. Let's, you know, build up locally. Let's look at what businesses are available local. Let's get them back in. Let's get them back working. Let's get them back as part of that community, and hopefully we can grow and create a much more sustainable food supply chain.
Fantastic. Miranda, what do you think? What's the success that we're going to create out of this, please?
Well, I think it's about kind of refocusing people's minds on the fact that we do absolutely have to look after the most vulnerable in our society, and we have to make sure that they are, you know, they have access to a healthy life in the long term. And I think we'd forgotten that over the past decade. And although in the short term this situation makes it a lot worse for those people, I think in the long term I'm hopeful that this government and successive governments will not forget about them and will actually really substantially address this inequalities issue that we've got in the country.
Fantastic. Well done, Miranda. And just on inequality, Maureen, Miranda, I haven't given you 4 stars, 4 yeses, so thank you as well. Dawn, summarise for us. Come on, you did such a good job there, and we're going to have truckloads of fresh produce hopefully arriving with you in the next half an hour. How go on.
Sorry, no, I didn't mean apologies. I think for me, the overwhelming sense of communities looking after communities has been amazing through COVID. You know, we're shopping local, we're delivering local, we're looking after our neighbours. Everybody has a neighbour. You've all got scope to make sure that next door, be it next door 2 metres or next door 2 miles, that person is okay. And I think, we've been blown away by the generosity and the support. And I think there is no them and us anymore. This literally has touched every single doorstep. Therefore, every doorstep has a responsibility to look after the next one.
Boom. Dawn, well done. Leon.
I think, what just was said, I agree with all of that. It touched all of us and bring back humanity into focus on humanity rather than economy. And I always like to focus on ecology, which is basically how nature works, and use that as an example. So that's my brief answer, but I think, in what everyone has said so far, I agree with that.
And everyone, look at Compassion London website. We'll put it on the links when we send that record later. Amazing business what Leon and his team have set up. Lucy, I've just had a text in from Boris Johnson. He can talk to you at 3, if that's okay with you.
That works for me.
Lucy, you have the floor. Wrap up for us.
Okay, very quickly. What I'd like to see coming out of this is that we're creating a generation of food citizens, not passive food consumers, that we are building on the community spirit and networks that are coming together in this current crisis, and that we can build a sustainable food future that is fair and just for everyone, whoever it is, wherever you're working in it.
Fantastic. Wow, everyone, what an amazing lineup. I'm just so staggered by these, how we start off on a slightly depressing note, in that we did our minute silence for all those individuals who've passed away due to COVID-19, and then we rattle through, find solutions not only for the short term and the medium term, but also the long term. Hopefully, get some amazing produce into the likes of Dawn, Lucy, and Leon, and come out with this really positive ending. Just as we wrap up, thank you to all of our sponsors. Our next webinar is the 5th of May, next Tuesday, 2 p.m. What next for the 8.5 billion flower sector? That's a whole another conversation in itself. And we're just going to wrap up by Dawn. Can we see your flower that's going to be in your bouquet, please, for when we get you married online? Look at that. Fantastic. So Dawn, I hope you're going to invite the 1,000 odd people that are watching.
Everyone's invited.
Boom. Everyone, thank you very much for participating. It's been fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.